Do you have a pretty good handle on your requirements but want to refine them to the next level? Or do you have requirements that you're just having a lot of trouble writing in a way that makes sense? Well, what might help is use of a formal requirements language. Now, before we get into terms like ontology, which I prefer the term meta model, basically the pieces in the space and their definitions and how they all fit together. So that I consider that an ontology. Please know that the problem this solves is that if there's logic problems with your requirement, if something happens at the same time but only under this condition, otherwise they're in sequence, that's where formal languages can come into play. Now, Z is a formal language out there, and basically what these do is it turns requirements that look like they are a natural language, so like English is a natural language. If you write a shall statement, okay, the bicycle shall be able to be pedaled by an average human being with a reliability of 0.99. That's a natural language English requirement. The formal ones, they look a little different. It almost looks like a mathematical proof, if you remember some of your math classes back then. Okay, they use logic signs, and there's a language and a syntax for all that. What that can help us with is to really extract, what is really happening. It sort of forces us to identify, okay, what is the constraint here that we're trying to levy on the product. Now, if you don't like formal languages, if you don't want to use Z, then a lot of people use UML or SysML to model, maybe not the requirement, but model the phenomena of how the product should work. And then that becomes the constraint. Okay, you set something up in SysML, this is how we want things to talk to each other and expect this data point over here. This is how we want it to work. Then you could write requirements off of that model, give them to the software engineers or the hardware designers to start designing the product. So if you're having trouble with requirements, if the logic's not quite right, or if they're good but they're not great, and you really need them to be rock solid to minimize cost and schedule, then you may want to consider using a formal requirements language like Z. Put your requirements in that language, and then you're going to ferret out the defects that might still be there. Barring Z, you may want to consider moving it all to a SysML model, and then that'll drive out the constraints. That'll find the logic errors in the architecture, and then we can move that to the requirements and then have a much more solid system before we start writing production code or cutting metal. Comment below or direct message me if you want more references. There are some presentations and some papers out there on Z and formal languages for requirements. They're out there. Message me if you're interested. We can have a dialogue and I can help get you what you need, hopefully. See you in the next tip.